Yeah.
How do you do that? I mean, how do you kill yourself with a shotgun and hang yourself at the same time?
Mark Middleton. Again, this is another reason why I don't think mainstream media lets anyone talk about the Clinton-Epstein relationship before the year 2000 or until Clinton left office. Mark Middleton was a central figure in some very significant Clinton-era scandals. It was not just him abusing his access to the White House after he left. I'll give you an example. Congress was investigating Mark Middleton at the time 9/11 happened. And, of course, 9/11 happens, they move on to other stuff, obviously. But before then, the Bush administration, George W. Bush's first time invoking executive privilege was to block the release of documents to Congress about 3 different things. One of those was Mark Middleton. Why is Bush stepping in to protect a Clinton aide? That should tell you that there's something bigger there with Mark Middleton. And then if you look at when Mark Middleton was called to testify as part of these investigations, he pleaded the Fifth 28 times, including to the question, are you a foreign agent?
Wow.
So there's obviously a deeper story here. The question is, why wasn't Mark Middleton, suicided, whatever you want to call it, back then? Why did it happen so recently? I would argue it's because in 2019, when the Epstein case broke, it was alleged by the Daily Beast that Epstein had only had 5 meetings with Mark Middleton. And then you find out from Daily Mail gets White House visitor logs a couple of months, maybe like 4 months before Mark Middleton's found dead. It was around 15. It was much higher. Something was going on. And then if, of course, you go and look at what was Mark Middleton involved in at the time he was meeting with Epstein and what was Epstein doing, it starts to get really weird. Epstein, at the time he was meeting with Mark Middleton on behalf of Leslie Wexner, was involved in negotiating the relocation of Southern Air Transport from Miami, Florida to Columbus, Ohio, where it would ostensibly be mainly running cargo for Wexner's company, The Limited. Have you ever heard of Southern Air Transport? Southern Air Transport used to be Air America. It was the CIA's proprietary airline.
And Wexner bought it. He bought the bunch of the
Well,
planes.
he didn't buy it, but he basically, pulling levers, got a very attractive incentive package developed by the government of Ohio, taxpayers on the hook, to relocate Southern Air Transport.
Right.
Promises of bringing all these jobs, which never materialize, and basically Southern Air Transport gets pumped and dumped and goes bankrupt a few years after this move by the end of the 90s. But anyway, it was being, in the 1980s, it was the main airline for Iran-Contra. Arms and weapons dealing, and then gets involved with some weird stuff going on with the first Gulf War. And with that history, that is the specific airline sought out by Epstein and Wexner. They could have gone for any other airline in the U.S. There's a lot. They first tried one called Aero Air, also tied to Iran-Contra, and also the BCCI scandal. Then they go to this Polar Air Cargo, which is a joint partnership of 3 companies, one of which is Southern Air Transport. The other 2 guys kick out Southern Air Transport. The Limited dumps Polar Air Cargo and goes straight to Southern Air Transport. They seem to be very desperate for one of these shady airlines. And Southern Air Transport previously, like I said, was in Miami, Florida. And during Iran-Contra, of course, it was going to Latin America, Mena, Arkansas, or Clinton's governor. All this weird stuff's going on. Yeah. And it goes to Columbus. It starts going from Columbus to Hong Kong. That's the circuit it's going. What is Mark Middleton doing during this period? Mark Middleton is a central figure in a largely forgotten Clinton-era scandal called Chinagate that intimately involves a bunch of very weird business ties between Southeast Asian conglomerates, mainly the Lippo Group, which had gone into business with the Chinese government by this time. And a bunch of very, very weird stuff happens. I don't know how deep you guys want to go into that scandal because it's very convoluted, very extreme. But basically, I would say sort of Chinagate in a sense is a misnomer because what is really going on here is that this is the Riotti family and Jackson Stevens. So
I do want you to talk on the Riotti family.
Okay.
If you can touch on that.
Yeah, sure. So the Riottis are I guess, ethnically Chinese, but they've been in Indonesia for a very long time. They're one of the main oligarchs in that country. Their main business interest for a long time has been based around the Lippo Group, which has a bazillion subsidiaries all over the world, mainly concentrated in Southeast Asia, but also, of course, a U.S. subsidiary as well, which was run by this guy named Johnny Huang, who at the time of Chinagate, who was a major guy in the Chinagate scandal. And sometime in the early 80s, the Riyadis, got involved in Little Rock, Arkansas, and forged an early partnership with Jackson Stevens, who's one of these Arkansas businessmen, political kingmakers. He's largely seen as being responsible for Clinton's political career from Arkansas onward. But he also, for example, financed the campaign of George Bush Sr., sort of playing both sides. And a lot of his companies that he ran, Stevens Inc., Beverly Enterprises, Systematics, have either been tied to major Clinton corruption scandals of the past or to Iran-Contra, specifically in the case of Systematics. So the Riyadi family and Jackson Stevens had these intertwined business dealings and basically, become sort of this hub of political cronyism in Arkansas. And then, of course, Clinton gets into the presidential office and it, is much more expansive than that at that point, meaning beyond Arkansas, obviously. So basically what was going on with Chinagate, I guess you could say, is that a bunch of money from foreign nationals, mainly Chinese nationals, a lot of them with ties to the Chinese government or the Chinese military, are being funneled through a series of individuals who can donate to the DNC, or the DNC is directly taking money from people that are foreign nationals who, of course, can't legally contribute to campaigns. And so, that was the focus of the congressional investigation, that it was like illegal fundraising. But what was that money buying these people? It was almost all focused on the Commerce Department. The head of the Commerce Department at this time is Ron Brown, who, of course, dies under very suspicious circumstances near the end of this, when it starts to come out in the 90s, I think 96 or so. Dies in a plane crash, but he has a bullet wound in his head. And all the other,
maybe somebody was shooting in a forest and that bullet went into the plane.
Well, here's the thing. The part of the Commerce Department that was most targeted by Chinagate, the ITA, all the other people on the plane with him pretty much were ITA, except for Johnny Huang wasn't on the plane because he'd been let go by that point. But right before Ron Brown gets on that plane to Croatia, he agreed to investigate or cooperate with independent counsel probes into this stuff. And he is unexpectedly asked to go on a trade mission to Croatia, and then the plane crashes, allegedly blamed on a 1930s-era navigation system at the airport in Croatia. But a few days after the crash, the head of the navigation at that Croatian airport is found dead with a shotgun wound to the chest, and it's ruled a suicide. So there's some weird stuff going on with Chinagate, to say the very least. But again, I think it's really more of a misnomer. There's a lot deeper corruption here. And I talk about it pretty extensively in my book, going through the congressional, the Senate reports, and all of that. And some of the main things that seemed to be going on there, it was about getting the Commerce Department and the Clinton administration to push for most favored nation trading status with China, and to there was a certain point where, in exchange for that, Clinton had banned the import of Chinese weapons to the United States as sort of the caveat for giving China MFN status. And before then, the biggest market for Chinese weapons was the United States. So they're smuggling weapons into the U.S., and they get caught doing that on some Chinese state-owned barges coming to the West Coast. But then you have to wonder, well, what was going on with Southern Air Transport? Going from Hong Kong to Columbus. And if you think about, I think we talked about this last time, Epstein had these weird associations with arms deals in Iran-Contra, was mentored by an arms dealer named Douglas Lease, who had, all sorts of connections to the defense industry, both in Britain and the U.S. He's a British guy, though. And that's the guy that connected him with Stephen Hoffenberg of Towers Financial and the Ponzi scheme that was ran there, and Epstein's name was dropped from the case. Hoffenberg took the hit, and instead of Epstein going to prison, he starts hanging out with Robert Rubin at the White House, who's a former head of Goldman Sachs. There's a crazy, I don't know. I mean, there's so much we could get into with the whole Clinton-Epstein thing in the 90s. Again, this is why I say they only talk about Clinton and Epstein after Clinton left office, because they don't want you looking at all this crazy stuff.